People tell us you changed the trajectory of our family because we now know that we have these vacations set aside and the spaces are big enough to accommodate our two grown kids with their partners and their kids. And we would have never been able to do this trip without you.
You're listening to What Fuels You, where we deep dive with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders to learn more about their stories and uncover nuggets of wisdom we can all use. I'm your host, Shauna Swerland, CEO of Fuel Talent, an award-winning recruiting firm based in Seattle. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Brad Handler. Brad is an entrepreneur redefining the luxury travel industry. He began his post-college career at American Management Systems and later joined Apple. After earning his law degree, he practiced at a leading Silicon Valley firm before becoming eBay's first in-house counsel from 1997 to 2001. But Brad is best known for his innovation in the world of destination travel clubs. In 2002, Brad founded Exclusive Resorts with his brother Brent and served as the company's CEO and chairman. Brad and Brent then created Inspirato, a vacation service that under their leadership delivered personalized high-end travel experiences. After leaving Inspirato in 2024, Brad founded Passport Golf, which partners with premier country clubs to offer once-in-a-lifetime golf excursions to destinations such as New Zealand, Scotland, and Ireland. He holds dual bachelor's degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and a JD from the University of Virginia Law School. Welcome, Brad. So happy to have you here. Really psyched.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Okay, I'm hitting you with rapid fire out of the gate. Super curious. I know obviously you're a lifelong traveler, but I'm curious what you do to unwind after a long day.
After a long day, I will generally read. And I try to not read anything that is current or news. I try to read fiction when I try to relax, and I try and limit my intake of all of the nonsense, particularly now, to a couple of breaks during the day that are consolidated and fixed, and not stay lingering as a lot of people I know do and just stay glued to it all day because then you can't get anything done. So I try and take in all the bad as I can, and then I try not to do any of that if I'm really trying to relax at night and go to sleep.
Yeah.
And I'll also listen to jazz music.
Nice. Okay. What's, I guess, a favorite place or some place that you go back to over and over, even if you want to see other places?
Florence.
Oh, me too. I studied abroad in Siena in college, and Florence is the coolest.
Florence is good, but Siena gets that really good bread once a year. We've been there when they have the Siena bread and they do the little horse race.
Oh, yeah. The Pia, what is it called? The
I
Pia.
think it's called All Saints bread. It's kind of like challah with raisins and nuts.
You're making me hungry. Who is your favorite jazz artist?
Well, there's a couple of different kinds of jazz. So there's a band that's local here to Denver that I grew up with that I like called Dot Sarah, which is really good. But I'm a big fan of Grover Washington Jr. I was fortunate enough to meet him before he died and interview him once. And I've just always thought that he's just fantastic. So I'm a big fan of his. There's a Japanese saxophonist who I believe is the greatest jazz saxophonist ever, named Sato Watanabe, who is got to be in his 80s or early 90s and still plays. And I'm still trying to get to Japan when he's giving a concert so I can see him live. But Sato Watanabe is probably my single favorite jazz musician. For those that are interested in Sato Watanabe, his album Misha, I think, is his best album.
And what
Yeah.
about authors? When you do want to chill out and relax, who are some of your favorite authors?
Well, I try and read a variety of stuff. There's a couple of authors. There's a guy named Kim Stanley Robinson who writes science fiction, but very based in fact. He did a trilogy, Red Mars, Blue Mars, Green Mars, 3 separate books, all about colonization of Mars with lots of science in it. And he's done a lot of really great science fiction books, a lot that deal with climate crisis and all kinds of stuff. So whenever he has a new book, I like to read his. There's a couple of thriller authors that I like to read, like the John Milton series. I can't remember the name of the author. There's another author, Mark Gurney, who has a hero that goes through multiple books. If I can find a series, I like that. There's a series called The Bobaverse, which is now 5 books, which is a good one. There's also an author named Barry Eisler, who I like very much. He's got a couple of series. I'm a big fan of his Rain Man series, all very good books.
Nice. I'm like taking notes here. I don't know that I would read the Mars ones, but the thrillers probably.
Kim Stanley Robinson has one that's 2140, 2150, and I think 2160 or 80, or 2080, maybe but it's all about climate crisis and sort of the science around that. So that'd be a good one to dive into him. He also has
Oh
another
yeah.
one you might like called The Years of Rice and Salt, which is an
Hmm.
alternative history that basically takes the premise of what if the Great Plague wiped out 95% of
Oh
Europe instead
geez.
of 50%, and the
I want
rise
like pleasure. This is all sounding a little depressing.
the rise of Western civilization didn't happen, and instead Eastern civilization became the dominant civilization.
Ooh,
And he
I've
wrote,
heard of this book.
yeah, and he wrote this whole book on it. It's very good.
I'm writing it down. Okay, cool. I got that one. Is there a gadget or an app that you cannot live without right now?
I do check something pretty frequently, which is I kind of collect and restore old computers, sort of from the 70s and 80s. And so I do use an app that keeps those groups and people who are restoring those devices or selling those devices or wanting to buy those devices. So I kind of try and check that every couple of
That's pretty
days. But
nichey.
yeah, it's pretty nichey. But other than that, I mean, I use Audible a lot
Yeah, you do too.
to listen to books. Well, now it's just music on in iOS. I use the music app all the time, the podcast app to listen to, the podcasts that I listen to. So I use those probably, and I use the weather app to
Yeah, the
know
weather app for sure in
what,
Denver, especially.
I want to know if I'm going to be able to go out and play golf in the morning or not. So
Yeah.
I always look at that.
I know spoke very highly of your wife, and I'm
She's
curious,
awesome.
yeah, what are the three traits that you most love about her?
She's brutally honest, unbelievably supporting, and a fantastic person that cares about the other and the stranger, people that she doesn't know.
She's like a good person.
Yeah, and her involvement in nonprofits is all about helping people that she doesn't necessarily have any reason to ever have contact with, but is very committed to that work. And her nonprofit work is on helping nonprofits understand how to do governance in an
Mm,
appropriate way, because a lot of nonprofits get started by a founder and they're either self-funded or they're funded by one or two groups that fund it and think that they can control it forever without transitioning into a real nonprofit that will outlive a founder and that will outlive their funders. And so she's created this expertise in being able to help nonprofits transition into getting a more sensible governance structure and board structure.
oh, wow. That's very needed. That's great. And what about your kids? What three words do you think your kids would use to describe you?
To describe me? Well, that's a good question. Well, I have 3 daughters, and they would use 3 very different words because they're very different people. But I would guess the commonality might be, well, probably phrases. There's a technology wizard. So if something doesn't work, they bring it to me. Sometimes I just have to look at it and it starts to work. Travel consultant, right? So they need a ticket, they're going somewhere, whatever. They come and find me, and they probably all say, I wanted to teach them golf, and they never did it. And I wanted them all to do public speaking and debate in high school, and none of them ever wanted to do it. So,
I know. I'm like, my kids have never listened. I'm always asking questions as a mom, and like, none of my kids have ever listened to the podcast. But when I'm interviewing CEOs, I'm like, oh, my kids could totally benefit from this person's wisdom. I'm like, well, if it wasn't my podcast, maybe they've listened.
right,
I don't know. It's funny they
right.
don't listen to the parents. Is there a CEO that you most admire? or that you would love to meet?
I'd love to meet Tim Cook at Apple. I used to work at
Yes.
Apple a long time ago, and I'm a big Apple fan. So I would love to meet him and just sort of have a chat. And I'd love to meet also like the CEO, any CEO of a very large airline, because I think that is probably the hardest hospitality business to manage expectations of your customers. I know a lot of the hospitality CEOs in lodging and stuff like that, but I've never had a chance to sit down and chat with the CEO of a really large international airline.
I'm sure you could
Uh,
make that happen. That's just an email.
Trying to understand how they make the trade-offs that they make between cost, efficiency, and customer loyalty, because their pieces that move along the board are so interdependent.
Yeah.
I think that's a much harder job than being the CEO of a large hospitality company, even though a large hospitality company like a Marriott or a Hyatt has, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of rooms, but the individual resource management at the local level can deal with a lot of the stress. Whereas for an airline, you get socked by weather or a strike or a cost raise or something, it affects the whole system instantly. And I
Yeah.
think that just understanding how they map for that would, I think, be interesting.
I agree. Well, plus you're dealing with people when they're like high stress versus like on vacation at a hotel. Like
Yeah.
people, even low stress people are more anxious, I feel like, at the airport. So yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay,
Yeah.
final rapid fire, and then we're going to get into your life. Mr. Golfer, what's the most beautiful golf course you've ever played, or that one that you are dying to play that you just haven't yet?
I think the most beautiful golf course is the one that I'm on whenever I'm on it, because it's just nice to be
That's a great
outside.
answer. Yeah.
And I played this morning, and I'm not very good, but I like to be outside. I often will go and play. There's a par 3 course near my house. I will often go early in the morning, try and be the first guy out, and it takes less than an hour, and then you're done for the day. And you've already got, a couple thousand steps banked for your day of exercise. And you got to just have this nice, quiet, serene experience, really,
Yeah.
out in nature. Of courses that I've played, one of my favorites is in New Zealand called Cape Kidnappers. It's just very different in the way in which the course uses the environment
Mm,
and wraps around these magnificent edges right along the water. And the way they use the water is just fantastic. There's another course called Cowrie Cliffs, also in New Zealand, which is also a favorite of mine. So those are probably my two favorite courses that I go back
yeah.
to again and again. But I could be playing on a muni course in the middle of the city with someone because I happen to be there, and that'll be my favorite course at that point in time.
Yeah. So you're a golfer. I love it. So you grew up in Denver. Tell me about that upbringing and kind of who was shaping you when you were little. Some of the things you just brought up sound like you were like a geeky. I don't know that word to use. You're like taking apart computers. Who showed you how to
Yeah.
do all this stuff?
Well, I grew up in Denver. I have one brother, a younger brother. He's 15 months younger. And he and I jointly founded the two travel companies that we were involved in. So we did that together. My dad was an entrepreneur, and he owned a clothing business, a clothing manufacturing business that he sold when I was about maybe 12, and then he bought another clothing business. So he was always, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, having to make something happen, right? He never had a desk job. So we didn't really we didn't do anything as a family that you would say, like game night was not just playing backgammon or chess. It was usually Monopoly, and it was pretty cutthroat, and it was learning, how to do business.
Mm,
My dad didn't go to college, and everything that he learned by having to find his own way. And so that lesson resonated in me, resonated in my brother. And that's why we spent, 25 years together running two travel companies, because of the lessons that we learned from my dad growing up. So that was a pretty big influence. On the computer question, I was always kind of curious sort of how they worked. I grew up, in sort of the late 70s and early 80s of going to junior high and high school. I'm old enough that we called it junior high instead of middle school. But my dad had just purchased an IBM system for them to do inventory and accounting on when I was really little, like third or fourth grade. And I went with him to his office one weekend, and he set me in front of it, and it had like a tic-tac-toe game that he said, here, play tic-tac-toe. And so I was playing tic-tac-toe against this computer, and I wanted to know how it worked. And I was very curious, and I kept looking for how to make it work. So I'm finally, the guy that worked at the company that was in charge of the computer finally got some time where he showed me sort of how that works and what a program is. And then I was able to actually write a little bit of code and make some things happen. And I thought that was just a fantastic, fun, creative outlet of how to take something that you could see in your head and translate it into something that would appear on a printed page or on a screen. And then when I was the summer between sixth and seventh grade, when I got bar mitzvahed, I took most of the money and bought a computer, and just randomly bought an Apple II computer and took it home and just devoured it and spent every waking moment that I could trying to figure out how it works and why it works in that
That's
particular
so
way.
cool. I've had some guests on the podcast who speak almost like the same language as you, where they do talk about tinkering and they're just curious and they're taking things apart. And I'm so kind of intrigued by that because we're around the same age and we had a computer too, but I wasn't tempted to try to take it apart. I just wanted to and I am a curious person, but it is a certain type who wants to really figure out the inner workings of a computer. And the fact that you've got so many different facets, you're kind of this unicorn because you also have studied business and you went to law school. And it's like you've used all these different types, different parts of your brain. So in high school, you also were tennis and debate.
Yeah, I was on the tennis team. My younger brother was a much better tennis player, so he was always ahead of me in the ladder,
Yeah.
which was a lot of fun in high school. So he's a much
Yeah.
better athlete than I am.
Dad didn't go to college, was it important to him that you and your brother went to college? And were you, I mean, obviously you went to Penn, were you a good,
Yeah,
I'm guessing, good student?
I think it was important to him. My mom was a teacher,
Mm,
and so it was really important to her. We had a strong culture, I guess, of learning and encouraging learning in the family. My dad was particularly good at math and very fast, all in his head, and could remember, his inventory numbers and what went
wow.
in and out on, a business that was shipping stuff every day. So, you grow up around that, and it's pretty, you just soak it all in because that's kind of what you see every day. And I was, for my family, my mom had gone to college here in Denver to what was then called Colorado Women's College, and came out a teacher. And so she taught American history and government in high school. So there was, always this sort of sense of learning. And then my mom went back to school and got a master's when I was in elementary school and junior high. So
Wow.
this learning as an important part of what you do was, one of the things that we picked up. So when it was time to pick a school and go to college, I just kind of looked around and was really very fortunate to get into Penn. With three kids now, that two are already through college and one is halfway through college. I couldn't get in there now, so I'm glad I did it
We
back
all say
then.
that. I know.
Yeah,
I got into schools that I'm sorry, kids. It was a little
yeah.
different back then. And I played tennis in college, which helped, but it's definitely different now for sure. But Penn, I mean, Cool opportunity. And especially coming from Denver, were you kind of exposed all of a sudden to this East Coast mentality? I mean, a lot of kids not coming from Denver to Penn.
Yeah, it was my my high school was really weird that year, Thomas Jefferson High School, and it was not known as an intellectual powerhouse of Denver or Colorado schools. My year, something weird was going on because they sent two kids to Harvard, three kids to Stanford, three kids to Penn. So there were three kids,
Wow.
two kids that I knew. I don't think I've ever sent a person to Penn before, and I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure we'd never sent anyone to Stanford before. So it was just kind of a weird sort of tick in who got in where. But Penn and the East Coast was definitely very different than growing up in Colorado. For one thing, I don't understand what they call skiing out there, but that's a whole nother
Right. It's
story.
like skiing on like cement, like
Yeah,
ice.
on
No,
ice. Yeah.
on ice, totally. So, when you went to Penn, did you have an idea of like, this is what I want to be when I grow up? You were already tinkering with computers. Were you thinking you wanted to pursue tech?
I mean, I'd been writing commercial software already that had, been used by companies here in Denver and some national companies that were using some software that I had written. So I was, basically pursuing that as a vocation, I guess. And, Penn in the college didn't really have much computer on the Wharton side. It was called at the time decision science, but the engineering school really had the real diehard computer folks. But I wasn't in the engineering school because I really wanted to get. It was really important also to my mom that I get a liberal arts education. So I was a history major in the college, and my dad. It was really important to him that I get a business degree. So, and from Wharton, I got a business degree. So I didn't really spend any time in the engineering school at all because 2 degrees was about all I could handle. And then I also worked at the computer store. So I was doing that 30 to 40 hours a week, going to school and was on what was called the parliamentary debate team at Penn. So those were like the three things that I did for the 4 years that I was in
That's
college.
busy college. That's
Very busy. Yeah, very busy.
crazy busy. So tell me, what'd you do right out of school? Were you like, it sounds like you weren't thinking, let me go ski for a year, or let me go take some
No,
time and be a bartender or something.
No, I needed to make money, right? I mean, my family, it's not like it was easy to afford pen, and I needed to work and I needed to get a job. So I got a job at a consulting company that was at the time called American Management Systems in Washington, D.C. as a tech consultant, worked on projects, one in Minnesota for the state of Minnesota, worked on a project for the US Navy. And then I went to Apple and worked in their government systems group for a couple of years. And for me, when I was there at that time at Apple, which was sort of what was called between jobs, because that was when Steve Jobs wasn't there, if you were a really gifted engineer, you could do whatever you want and you had free reign. And if you were pretty good, you got promoted. And so as soon as I got promoted, I realized I wasn't really a gifted engineer compared to the lot that was, working at Apple. So the second choice was go to law school. So that's what I did. I went to law school. So I
That's
worked
it.
at
So do you
AMS.
like that choice when you look back now with the perspective, if you're giving your kind of lifeline and their ups and downs in your life? Tell me, like, how did you get the job at Apple? What was that interview process like? I'm very kind of intrigued by being early days at Apple.
Well, I was doing a project at AMS for the Navy on how to remove printing presses from large ships, from basically aircraft carriers, helicarriers, which are called LHAs, and tenders, which are the boats that fix the other boats. And they were all built with printing presses embedded in them, and they're heavy. And so anything you can do to remove weight means you can reduce fuel. And they wanted to remove the printing presses and go to a digital form. So at AMS, the project was to help them with that. And I'd had a lot of experience with prior work at Apple. So I tried to get Apple engaged in the project. And at the same time, I got Next engaged in the project. And so they were both kind of competing to be the supplier for this test that we were doing with the Navy. And then when that was over, the guy that was the contact at Apple for the program called me and said, "Hey, if you're interested, there's a position that we're going to open up here for someone at Apple. And I think if you're interested in working in our government group, we have a spot here in Reston, Virginia," because I was living in Virginia at the time as opposed to living in Palo Alto. So he
Yeah.
said, "If you're interested, you should come down and interview for it." And so that seemed like a good idea. So that I did that. And, I think I interviewed on a Thursday and started, a week or 2 weeks later.
That's super, super cool. I mean, I'm thinking of you. Am I getting this right? You're like early 20s at this time?
I was 21 or 22.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's nuts. The stuff, first of all, like getting deals done at that magnitude and
Yeah,
also
I
getting
was
recruited at that age. I mean, it's pretty
I
cool.
I was the youngest person in that group by a long shot.
I
Yeah.
would imagine so, yeah. And so then you're managing people who are way older than you.
Well, not in the beginning, but
No, no, but when you get promoted, I
yeah,
mean, that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
So where'd the law school thing come in? That when I was researching you for the podcast, that I didn't know that you went to, I mean, obviously I did because were general counsel, but I guess I just didn't realize such a strong tech background and then going to law school. Like,
Mm.
who put that in your mind and why was that the right idea at the time?
So one of my dad's cousins was a fairly famous First Amendment lawyer here in Denver and had a couple of cases at the Supreme Court. And so I talked to him a little bit about it. Our families shared tickets to the Denver Broncos games so that he was
Mm,
always, next to me when we were sitting there. So it was, we could talk to him as I was growing up. And I always thought that what he was doing was really interesting. And the litigation he was doing around the First Amendment was super interesting. And so at Apple, where I could see that my future at Apple was going to be more management and less actually doing stuff, I started to think about law school. And I went and spoke with the lawyer in the federal group for Apple who was there in Reston. And I talked to him about it and said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, you live in Virginia. You might as well apply to Virginia to go to law school because you live here and it's a
mm.
lot less expensive and it's a good law school." And I said, "That sounds great." And so that's what I did. And so then I ended up at Virginia for law school simply because I happened to be a Virginia resident. And that was a pretty straightforward choice back then. Again, not sure I could get in there now, but I just had my 30th law school reunion. So, a lot of time has passed. That was the transition.
Are you in touch with your friends from high school, college, law school, none of the above, all of the above?
I'm in touch with a couple of friends from high school on a fairly regular basis, maybe three or four. From college, a couple of people from college, my college roommate and debate partner, talk to him a lot. We do a fair amount of travel together. And from law school, I have a lot more friends from law school because I had a lot more time in law school, right? I
Yeah.
was taking, at the peak at Penn, I was taking 7 classes a term and
And
uh,
working.
and working. And at law school, it's 3 or 4 classes a term. There's just one exam at the end of the term. It's not that difficult.
Yeah.
So I had a ton of free time, a lot more free time, and was a lot more social in law school than in
Yeah.
college, which I think is fairly unique. But Virginia, as a law school, fosters a community of collaboration, which is also very unique among American law schools. So I didn't know that really when I chose it, but it was a great thing to come to as a different experience than Penn was.
And so your daughters, two, I guess you said graduating, one about to graduate or could in college.
Two have graduated college, and one is left in college. And I don't know how it happened, but she ended up at this university in Charlottesville, Virginia, where she goes to the University of Virginia. So I just random, I guess.
There
I'm
you
not sure
go.
how that
Are
not
any
sure
of
how that
them going to
happened.
pursue law school?
I don't know.
My question is really
I
like if you're advising younger people, which I'm guessing people hit you up for. Would you say definitely go back to law school, or like, talking to your younger self, what would those key messages be?
And thinking about whether or not any of my daughters would ever go to law school. I do have one daughter who, in an argument when she believes that she has won, ends by saying, "You've been lawyered," and then walks away. So maybe that one, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. I think that law school, well, the right law school, and there's, it's different. Everyone has different needs and has a different experience. But if you can find the right law school that fits the way that you want to learn, I think that law school is a tremendous resource for someone who doesn't want to be a lawyer, because more than anything, it teaches you how to think.
Hmm.
And I think that high school and college increasingly require you to regurgitate and not think.
100%.
Yeah, and law school requires critical thinking. So whether you want to work in government, assuming that, we're going to have a government, whether you want to work in government or public policy or anything like that, going to law school teaches you critical skills about how to evaluate information and come to conclusions. So I'm a big fan of people going to law school if they have the time and the means to do it. I'm not a huge fan of everyone saying they want to be a lawyer, because we have
Yeah.
too many lawyers. But law school is also too long. Law school doesn't need to be 3 years. Law school could be 2 years. It's only 3 years because of the weight and inertia of history. But law school really only needs to be 2 years. And one of the things that I think law schools and business schools need to increasingly do is teach those subjects to each other. And in fact, I believe in it so strongly that at Virginia, I started a program that teaches law students a mini business curriculum of what they need
Mm.
to know about how to read a balance sheet and, some very simple accounting stuff, so that these kids that graduate as lawyers have some appreciation if they go into corporate practice as to what it
How
all
the
means.
business
And then
works. Yeah.
at the same time in business school, because I've taught both law school classes and business school classes, I teach business school classes that are basically a mini law clinic on what do you need to know about the law, specifically if you are studying business. And I think that law schools and business schools are increasingly realizing that they need to come together into a closer orbit and offer learning to the students of the other schools in a
Yeah.
more cohesive manner. So Santa Clara University is a good example, where a colleague of mine from when I was in private practice has started a whole program with a business certificate that law students can get because they, follow a particular path and program. But they've taken courses so that they can go out into the world and know what someone's talking about.
Yeah. I think it's super, super helpful.
Yeah, you think about someone could graduate from law school and be as young as 24, I guess, 24, 25, and never been in business, and then get
Yeah.
hired by a firm and then get plopped onto an account, and then the company A is merging with company B, and you've got to now somehow be the expert on, all the business underlying accounting. That's just not okay. They need better training.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you end up at eBay? I mean, Apple, eBay, like crazy first couple of experiences. How did that opportunity come to you? To
I'm
it?
just I'm just very lucky. I was a second year associate at a law firm that was then called Cooley, Godward, Castro, Huddleston, and Tatum, which now has adopted
It's
the
just Cooley
skinnier
Godward. Yeah.
moniker.
Yeah.
Yeah, that then went to
Just
Cooley, Godward,
Cooley.
and now is just Cooley. So they've gone on a
Yeah.
diet in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And I had started there in 1995, and at the time, Cooley had a DAC VAC system that was their document management system. And I was really, really irritated with it because it was hard to use. It wasn't user friendly. It was ridiculous. And I wanted to use my MacBook. Well, it wasn't called a MacBook then. I wanted to use my portable Mac. And they said no. It was called a PowerBook. I wanted to use my PowerBook 140, and no, you can't do that. There's no way to connect it. So I got frustrated and went in on a Saturday and just wrote the code to make it work, and it worked fine. And so I started using that to create my documents and do my research. And then I wrote an article in the daily legal newspaper, which in San Francisco is called the Daily Recorder, that was called The Confessions of a Mac Attorney. And I basically took my firm to task saying, how can you be a law firm that purports to represent technology companies and use technology that's 20 years old? It's
Oh
not
my
right.
God.
It's not fair. And it's not a thing. Here's what I did. And if you want to use technology, you need to embrace the technology. So needless to say, that caused a lot of stir at the law firm. And
Were you
as a
hoping for
form,
that? I mean, I'm guessing you knew that was going to
no,
happen.
no, I didn't think that. I didn't think it would be that big of a deal. And it really wasn't that big of a deal. But basically what they did is they said, well, you know what? We're going to put you on the associates committee. So anyone who's ever worked at a law firm knows that the associates committee is where they put associates who, for whatever reason, they want to have them, meet once a month. And then they're like, how are the associates doing? What can we do to help the associates? Like, if you've identified a problem, now you should try and fix the problem.
Yeah.
So here I am as a second year associate on the associates committee. And we met on Fridays twice a month, and it was at 8 o'clock. And so those were the only days that I got into the office early. So I would usually roll in like 9:30 because I lived like 45 minutes away with traffic in the Bay Area. So I get there and it's 1997, I guess. And at that time, every lawyer had two phone numbers. You had your public number, which was on your card, and then you had your private number because there was no caller ID or any of that nonsense. And basically, with your private number, that's, you gave that to your partner or your family or your friends or whoever you wanted to be able to call you where you knew you were going to answer that call, as opposed to your main number where most of the time you wouldn't answer it and you just let it go to voicemail. So in the office, it's about 10 minutes to 8, and my second line rings. Well, the only person I've given my number to on that second line is my wife. So I pick up the phone thinking that it's my wife, but it wasn't. It was the recruiter for
So the
eBay.
recruiters are very resourceful.
Yes. So it was the recruiter for eBay. And so she started talking about this client that she had that was looking for someone who had a legal background and would also be able to help with business development. And then I guessed at the company and I said, well, it must be eBay. And she said, well, how do you know that? And I said, well, I use it because I'll buy parts off of it to fix these computers that, I kind of refurbish, and then I'll donate the computers to a school or a synagogue or whatever once they get fixed. And so she said, why don't you come in and interview? So I came in to interview, and that was in the like May or June of 97. And they called me sort of late June and said, we'd love for you to take the job, but we want you to do the job in business development. And I said, that sounds great, but now that I know more about the company, you guys really need a lawyer. You need a full-time lawyer. And so if you want to talk about that job, I'm happy to talk about it. But if you're not going to bring in a full-time lawyer, you guys are going to get crushed as you get bigger. So, let me know. And they said, yeah, we've got an outside law firm. We don't need inside counsel. If you don't want to take the business development job, that's fine. We'll move on. So that was that. And so they moved on. My wife and I went to London, I think, on a vacation. And I said, something else will pop up. I knew I wasn't going to work in a firm for very long. I was going to go, corporate somewhere, maybe back to Apple and work in their legal group. And in September, they called me back and said, would you do both? Could you do 50% lawyer and 50% business development? And I didn't know at the time what had happened for them to get to this outcome, but I said, sure, that sounds great. So I took that. I took that offer. And on my first day, another company had hacked into eBay's computer database and stolen a bunch of user information and then spammed all the users. So instantly we were in litigation, and I never really did business development. It quickly became clear
Oh
that,
my
they
God.
needed a full-time lawyer. But, it was very lucky because it turns out they had started with the sixth years and I was a second year, and they kind of worked their way through. Then I said no. Then they went to another firm and worked their way through. And they actually got a guy who said yes, that he would take the job. And he told his firm he was going to take the job. And then his wife came home and said, hey, good news. We're pregnant. You're going to stick with your law job because they have benefits. And this other company, whatever it's called, no benefits, no real insurance yet, because it was pretty early in their development. So that guy then had to call and rescind. And that's when they called me because they figured
Oh,
they
so
needed someone pretty
lucky.
quickly.
So the
So,
very first general counsel there, how many employees were there at the time?
so I was employee 34 or 35, depending on who you ask.
Wow.
So
That's
two
crazy.
of us started on the same day. So I generally say 34. I generally say 35, and the other employee generally says, no, 30, that they were 35. So it was 34 or 35.
Yeah. And what did that lesson teach you about, timing and risk and how to bet on something big? Like, what were you using as
Better, better to be
was it,
lucky than smart. I mean, there's
yeah, because I always ask
no
people,
two
I'm
ways
like, was
about
that
that.
your gut or is that like some sort of analysis that you put through a lens of some sort when you're thinking about career choices?
Well, you can do all of that, and everyone I'm sure does, and I did my own version of that. But at the end of the day, it is really about being in the right place at the right time and creating an opportunity for you to have that opportunity.
Hmm.
So it's just as likely that my no was a no and I never ended up there, right? And so you'd asked earlier about when you're talking to young kids that, as sort of a mentor, they want some career advice. And I generally try and make 2 points based on kind of my own experience. And the first is that you need to treat the selection of the jobs that you're taking. And I use the same analogy when I talk about voting. It's public transportation. You're not going to get from point A to point B of what you think point B is in one trip. You can only get as close as you can go. So if your first job isn't exactly what you want, it's just a stop along the way. And the next job will be great or better. And the next job will be great or better. And you just keep working at it until you get there. Same thing with voting. People who tell me, oh, I didn't vote because I don't like the choices and nothing was going to happen for me. Well, you're an idiot because you just need to vote what the best choice is, just like public transportation. You're not going to get the ideal candidate in any race. You just want to get as close as you can to the destination that you want. And so I generally try and give that advice to folks. And then the second piece that I tell people is you just need to be open for what you think you might want to do, even if it's something you never thought of. I didn't,
Yeah.
I never thought I wanted to work at a company like eBay. That I would have never come up with that. And if that recruiter hadn't called me that day, or I hadn't been there on that Friday and it had gone to my voicemail, I would have never called her back because we got 10 calls a day from recruiters. It was impossible. It's the dot-com boom. It's impossible to know who to talk to. So it was all very random.
This is my question as a recruiter because I was working in San Francisco at that time, actually as a recruiter, which is crazy. We may have like crossed paths, but did that put it in your mind? Like some people are like, oh, I'll just know it when I see it. And I like the people and I like the industry and I'm in. Or did it put it in your mind like, you know what? Now that I'm looking here, maybe I should kind of go through this exercise with a few other tech companies for an in-house, general counsel role? Or did you just kind of, were you just one of those people that just knew it when you saw it?
It's impossible to think you want to go in and be the general counsel of any company when you're 2 years out of law school. Like that's just crazy talk. So it's more along the lines of what are the opportunities that are available. So I knew that working at a law firm was not going to be for me. Like you had to write down every 6 minutes that you worked for a project about everything that you did. And I never thought that it was fair to bill clients for me to learn about something before I actually did it. So, you're supposed to bill for your time on the airplane if you're reading about, whatever the case is and learning about whatever it is that you're supposed to be working on for whatever deal that is. And I always thought that was not fair. So I never did that. So I was billing at least 30 to 40% lower than anyone else in my year. And I knew that I didn't want to be on a grind to try and just bill hours for hours. Now, interestingly,
Hmm.
when I left, the managing partner of the firm wanted to meet with me. And so we met before I left and we chatted a little bit. And I asked him, I said, how come for these 2 years, no one has ever come to me and talked to me about how low my hours were? Where friends of mine who were, had way more hours than I did, but not what was required, had talking to. And this is when I understood the game of the law firm. He said, you're the only first year that ever brought in clients, right? As long as you bring
Mm,
in clients, we don't care how many hours you bill.
mm,
So, that I knew I was going to get out of working in a firm. Not just I didn't like being beholden to someone else's schedule, and that wasn't going to ever work for me. That's the entrepreneurial spirit in me,
yeah.
ran
Oh,
deep. I
totally.
wasn't going to do that.
That totally makes sense. Well, when you just talked about these 2 points that you like to kind of convey to younger people, the stops along the way, most people or a lot of people would have said, "Hey, I've arrived. I'm at eBay. I'm general counsel. It's going pretty well." So what made you decide, like, I want to do my own thing? Because I know that you kind of came up with this idea from a frustrating family trip, but you have to be open
Yeah,
to leaving a good thing and have a spouse that's on board with the
yeah,
risk. I mean, all
yeah.
those things have to align. Where were you in your life at that point?
So eBay was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I was the first lawyer there. And then eBay, I started in September of 97 or October of 97, and eBay went public in September of 98. So almost a year after I got there. It was 11 months after I got there, we went public. And you learn enough in law school to know that if you're a public company, there's a bunch of stuff that you can only know what you're supposed to do if you've kind of done it before. You need to have the experience for it. So I was pretty vocal about getting someone who was a lot more senior than me to actually be the general counsel. And I started doing public policy and then kind of running like the law office portion of all the lawyers we had, because we went from just me to 20 lawyers and 40 lawyers and 80 lawyers. Like we had a bunch of lawyers. And I always tried to hire people that were smarter than me, because everyone I hired was older than me and had more experience than me. And I needed to learn all of this stuff. So I surrounded myself with this really great team. And the company hired a partner from my old law firm that I had worked with to be the general counsel for when we were actually a public company. And so I was then in a situation where I could have stayed at eBay, I'm sure, for, as long as I wanted to stay there. But I had this other interesting opportunity arise from a vacation experience that I had and talking to my brother about it. And it was fortunate that I was able at that point to have the financial freedom to take that risk. So that was a pretty straightforward kind of transition out of eBay and kind of into what ultimately became Exclusive Resorts, really driven by the fact that as eBay became larger and multinational and bigger and just a dominant player in the space, the law department environment began to resemble a law firm,
Yeah, that's what
which
I
I
was
already
thinking you were going
knew.
to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, which I already knew I didn't really want to be a part of.
Yeah.
So it was pretty natural. I helped along the way with some consulting for them, sort of after I left, and particularly in the public policy area of kind of doing transitional stuff. But my middle daughter was my middle daughter was about 2 months from being born when I made the transition. And when my
Wow.
oldest daughter was born, eBay and Yahoo, I guess now, whatever, 30 years later, 29 years later, it's not a big secret, they were about ready to merge. And so I was spending a ton of time on that deal when we only had two attorneys. And
Wow.
so when my oldest daughter was born, for the first 5 or 6 weeks of her life, I saw very little of her because I was working on this deal, which ultimately never happened. And so with the new, child number two on the way, it just became more important to me to be able to control my schedule and be available. And
That makes
so
sense.
my brother and I then started what became Exclusive Resorts. And my oldest daughter at the time was, 1.5 years old. So they have no memory of me ever going into an office
Mm,
because I was always in California, and Inspirato and Exclusive Resorts offices have always been in Denver. And so I was always at home. So it was important for me to be around and available
yeah.
and,
Well, you designed your life and you were in a privileged position to be able to do that more,
I
which
was
is
very,
awesome.
very,
Yeah.
very fortunate. But I drove a lot of kids to school. I
Yeah.
picked a lot of kids up from school.
It's
I went to a
amazing to be
lot
able to
of,
say that. That's great.
gymnastics stuff. I went to a lot of volleyball games. I was able to do all that stuff because I made those decisions. Whereas if I'd stayed at eBay and, had a regular kind of
You
job,
had been in the
um,
grind. Yeah.
right. Or if I was working for if I was working for a company as opposed to working for myself in something that, I had started, you wouldn't have that freedom and
Yeah. Well,
flexibility.
and you could just go on vacation too as part of your business. If we have to go
That
research
that
this
is
resort,
a that
sign
is a
me
good
up.
benefit. That
And
is
what
a
was
good
your job
benefit.
versus Brent's job? And then you had a third co-founder, correct?
At Exclusive Resorts, there were three founders, and at Inspirato, there were four founders.
And so did you
So,
design, like, tell me about the order of things. You're having a conversation. What's that conversation like with Brent?
well, it all starts with my wife. So we're on vacation. We're in Hawaii at a resort, which I will not name, which is one of the nicest resorts that is supposedly in Hawaii. Well, the resort is in Hawaii. It's supposedly one of the nicest resorts. And I had asked for us to have a suite that had a full kitchen because I had, at the time I had two kids. And we showed up, and there was a little dorm fridge, like a little bar, and then a bar sink and a toaster oven. And I was really irritated because we were going to be there for 2 weeks. And I was like, with these kids, I don't want to take them to
Yeah,
the
you got
restaurant for every
bottles and all this
meal.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, older one, like, all she wants to eat is Cheerios, and it's a $25 breakfast buffet. Like, I was really irritated and agitated. And my brother was there at the same time with his family. He at the time had two kids. And I was just basically complaining about it. And my wife said, quit complaining, solve the problem. And so that is the origin story of Exclusive Resorts,
And so what
because
was your first step? Who do you call
I
on when
well,
you're like, I'm solving it now? Who do you call?
I wasn't going to quit complaining. I was going to keep talking about it. So then ultimately I had to solve the problem. So my brother had seen and read about a company that was doing something somewhat similar to what our first company was, but in a very different way, but had sort of a similar aim. And he said, you should look at this, and maybe you should join as a member because it seems like an interesting thing to do. So I spent a lot of time talking with that company and realized pretty quickly that their business model wasn't going to work. It wasn't possible for them to be a sustainable business, proven right by the fact that they went bankrupt a couple of years later. But the idea percolated, and my brother had started a company that did computer application education, like people need to learn how to use Word and Excel. And so his company ran classes for that kind of stuff, and he had just sold that company. And so we decided to make a go at this company. And we just started to brainstorm about how to solve it. Like, what did we want to happen for us? And the biggest guiding principle was, if you're going to go on vacation, you need to be in a place that's as nice or nicer than your own house. Otherwise, what's the point? Unless you're going camping, right? That's different. But
Right.
if you want to take a luxury vacation, if it's not nice or nicer than your house, why are you doing it? And between the two of us, we had four kids under 4 years old, well, under 5 years old at that time. So we also designed it to be very family friendly. So there was always a crib, so you didn't have to bring your own crib. There was always, plastic plates and
Chair and the
flatware that
whole,
kids
yeah.
could use. Yeah, and a high chair and all this kind of stuff. And I was fortunate enough, coming from the eBay diaspora, that I knew enough people who had also started families, who also wanted to travel in nice ways. And they became the first members. So like we had a lot of members to begin with. I was able to
Hmm.
just call people and people joined. And
And
then
what was the business
this
model?
the first we had to change the first business model we had, we weren't able to execute on because of some SEC requirements at the time, where it would have been viewed as an investment. Ironically, now that exact same business operates under a different name that somebody else started because the rules changed behind it. Basically what we were trying to do was make it an equity pool, based on 6 homes in pods of 6 that a group of 6 people would buy. We would operate and manage them, and then at some point in the future we would sell them, and we'd keep doing pods of 6, and you'd be able to travel, over the 18, whatever, however many houses there were, however many pods of 6 we were able to start. But the investment requirements in 2002, 2003, you couldn't do it. There was no way to get through SEC approval or blue sky approval for real estate in the state. So we tried to do that and it wasn't going to work. So we converted to a non-equity model, which is like what most golf clubs have. That we basically copied a golf club model. And that was the first business. And very successful. It's still a successful business. My brother and I don't retain any interest in that business. We had an early partner in Steve Case, and he ultimately bought the vast majority of the business. And so they've run it and they do a super good job. My brother and I are both still members of the business and use the services. And
Yeah. And so what's the business model now? Like, and when you got the members, you then had to go get the places. Where did you start and how did you map all that out?
we actually did it backwards. We started with the places. So when we started exclusive resorts, the basic question was, and again, this is where my wife comes in, was here's an idea. It's going to work or it's not going to work. I don't know. But if it doesn't work, where are the 4 places you want to own a house? And so she wanted to own something in New York. We thought it would be a good idea to have something in Vail. We wanted something in Hawaii. And then we took a chance and decided to put something in Mexico. That was not on the original list, but there was an opportunity in Mexico. So we started with those 4 locations, and we secured those locations before we really started to get members. Because if it didn't work, I'd just own those places. My brother
Yeah.
and I would have just owned those places.
Things could be
So
worse.
yeah,
Owning
so
places.
as I
Mexico's
said,
a
it's a
little
good
tough though, isn't it, to get those deals done? A little harder?
the development that we were in was done by a group in Denver that we knew, and so it wasn't as difficult as it could have been because we knew the
Yeah.
developers.
Yeah. And how soon
So
in did you know that you were onto something? I mean, you scaled pretty rapidly.
we scaled pretty rapidly. We were, I think, about 8 months in when Steve Case called, and that's kind of when you know that
Yeah.
whatever you're doing is making an impact.
Yeah.
So that was pretty good. But we started with 4. By contrast, when we started Inspirato, we actually had to compete with exclusive resorts. So when we started Inspirato, we needed 60 places. That's how much it changed. So when we launched Inspirato, we had 60 places.
And tell me about, for those who don't know, how they're different and why you needed 60 places.
Well, the model for exclusive resorts was you own the property and you run the hospitality company. And in the exclusive resorts world, every night has a fixed value and they're the same. So whether you're going to stay in Cabo or whether you're going to stay in Vail or whether you're going to stay in the south of France, all the homes are deemed to be equivalent, and your currency is a night, and you pre-buy your nights and then you spend your nights. So whether you're going to go to Cabo in August or Cabo in December, it's going to cost you one night, and that's a fixed price. Inspirato, we decided that we only wanted to be a hospitality company. So we did long-term leases of the property, and then we only had to manage the hospitality company, and we used money. And so if you want to go to Cabo in August, it might be $800 a night. And if you want to go over Christmas, it might be $5,000 a night. And there was no minimum. So members could go whenever they want. They didn't pre-buy days. The 2 companies over time realized that both business models have value and both companies have modulated their business to incorporate the positive aspects that the other model has in their main thrust. So they're much more alike now than they
Mm,
were when we started both of them.
yeah. And where's the white space, would you say now? I mean, obviously you've started Passport Golf and you're into the golf thing, but like in the luxury kind of, where's the innovation and hospitality, do you think now?
Well, in luxury hospitality, there was before Inspirato and exclusive resorts as innovation, the last real innovation was the founding of the Ritz-Carlton, and which was in the 80s. And since we founded Inspirato on the luxury side, I don't think there's been any real innovation that I can point to that has scale and will be systemic. There isn't anything out there. There's not a lot of white space. If I was starting something now that was targeting the same luxury, repeat luxury hospitality consumer, it would be pretty hard to compete against exclusive resorts. They've done an excellent job in managing through the crisis of like 2007, 2008, and then building, a really strong balance sheet and meeting or surpassing, member expectations. I think they've done a really good job. So, and again, I don't have any equity ownership in that company anymore. I'm just simply a customer. But they've done
Hmm.
a really good job. And there's a reason that there isn't anyone competing against them. There were close to 50 companies that we were tracking starting in 2002 that tried in some way to compete with exclusive resorts. And then
Wow.
later with Inspirato. And Inspirato was the only one which for a time was able to compete. But I think exclusive resorts has done a really good job with maintaining their level of quality,
Yeah.
and they've been good stewards of the experience.
So tell me, what is your brother doing these days?
So my brother and some of his partners started a company called Life Properties, and their mission in life is to develop these full-fledged resort developments. So golf course, housing, hotel, infrastructure, beach club, skiing, to the extent that they start to go into some more winter playgrounds. And they're developing these resorts right now, two in Mexico, one in Belize, and they've had a ton of success. And he's got great partners, and they've spent a lot of time, effort, and money in building what will be really fantastic places for families, particularly for multi-generational families that want to have a space that is unique and separate from everything else. So they've got one golf course open at their development outside of Puerto Vallarta, which is called Nelca. They've got a development in Belize, and I think the last development that they've announced is in Mexico on the Baja Peninsula. So Life Properties, they're doing a great job. I'm super supportive of what they're doing, but it's not something that I'm engaged in day to day. But certainly a huge fan of what they're doing and know the folks that he's doing it with. So I'd encourage
Cool.
anyone who's interested to give a look out to what they're doing as well.
I'm looking at it now. Oh, wow. Everything just makes me want to go on vacation as I'm researching you. I'm like, this is terrible. Do people's eyes light up? Like when I met you and you told me that you were the founder, I mean, you were so humble and like I had to dig that out of you. But it made me just kind of be like, oh, in this way that it does seem like, I don't know, everybody's got different levels, but I'm like, okay, what do you want this back half of life, your travel and life to look like, and to prioritize experiences, and it doesn't necessarily have to be luxury experiences, but to just
Right.
prioritize travel is
Right.
just told me immediately like, well, this is a cool person whose life is around creating experiences for families and shared memories, versus just like consuming things. Travel is clearly a value for you.
I think people find whatever the opportunities are that are available to them from a work standpoint. And some people are able to kind of forge their own path, and some people, for whatever reason, aren't.
Yeah.
And people then they find joy and happiness in whatever it is they're able to deliver. So if you're the guy that invented the World Wide Web, right, you didn't get rich off of it, but it's awesome that, this exists and built entire economies behind it, right? That has some meaning and fulfillment to it. The same way, like when I meet the people who run nonprofits, right? None of them are getting wealthy, but they're able to do these amazing things that help people's lives. And we've been successful in starting both of these companies, but for neither my brother nor me has it been, a huge financial windfall. That hasn't happened because of these companies for us in any way, shape, or form. But what we do have is people who we meet who will tell us consistently, you changed the trajectory of our family,
Oh,
because
yeah.
we now know that we have these vacations set aside and the spaces are big enough to accommodate our two grown kids with their partners and their kids. And we would have never been able to do this trip without you. And there's, hundreds of thousands, it's probably more than 1 million trips now if I was able to get the data and figure out how many trips they've all, between the two companies combined, have thrown off for people. And inevitably, at any event that I go to, if there's, an opportunity to mingle and meet with people afterwards, there'll be at least one person who will come and tell me it changed the trajectory of our family.
I can see
And
that for sure.
that, yeah, that has a lot of value and meaning, because Steve Jobs said he wanted to make a dent in the universe, and he clearly did. I don't think we're making a dent in the universe for people because they got to have a nice vacation, but I think that enough people have told us that it changed the way their family travels and the way they interact with each other is gratifying and
Oh,
satisfying.
for sure.
So
Yeah, I love
yeah.
that. And so tell me about this new chapter. Are you like fully working this thing or is it like a side deal? Because you're not a self promoter. You were kind of like, again, humble and chill about this opportunity also. But I want to know, and our listeners
Yeah.
probably want to know about Passport Golf.
Yeah, so Passport Golf is really an answer to a question that I had a couple years ago, which was, why are the golf trips that country clubs put on so terrible? Right? It's not that the trips themselves are terrible, but it's, a group of 8 guys that leave, someplace in Minnesota or someplace in Colorado or, someplace in Nebraska, and they go to California or Arizona or Mexico, and they play 4 courses in 5 days, and they stay at a mid-range hotel and they eat every night in the hotel bar, and then they play golf the next day. Like, that just doesn't seem fun to me. And I could never understand why those trips happened. And so I designed a trip that was enticing for the person who wants to play golf, but also for their partner who might not want to play golf every day and might want a different experience. And because I have so much personal experience in New Zealand, we started with New Zealand. And the trip to New Zealand is 12 days and it's 5 courses. And every other day is some fantastic experience. It's landing on a glacier. It's going on a ship between the Bay of Islands to look at the sea life and land on these remote islands. It's going by helicopter to play a par 3 course that you can only reach by helicopter. It's doing all these experiences on the other day that are once in a lifetime experiences. And on the days when there's golf, if the partner doesn't want to play golf, there's a bunch of stuff for the partner to do as well. And we marry these into the best resorts in the countryside where they either have golf or in some cases, the golf is separate. But we marry that all into an experience where you're staying in a fantastic place. The food's incredible, and we make it all encompassing, well, with the exception of alcohol, because you can burn a lot of money with alcohol, but it's all encompassing. And I've had 25 years of marketing to high end consumers a luxury product, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So instead, what I did was come up with this notion of working only through country clubs. And so I work through the golf pros at country clubs and say, here are the trips, and the itineraries are preset. Here are the trips. Here's what we do. If you can get 4 couples from your club to join on this trip, we can run the trip. and they're on these days, and we already have everything preset. We already have the rooms, we already have the tea times, everything's done. And we set it up in such that with four couples going, we're also able to send the golf pro as well, built into that. And then they
Oh,
have this experience. And so we do New Zealand, we're going to do Ireland, and we're going to do Scotland. And so
and
it's
who's the
basically,
we? Is there a business partner?
it's just me. I
That's so
am
cool.
I'm the only one. I've got a pretty good team set up on the ground in New Zealand that's already set. And so they're good. And then I've got some partners for Scotland and for Ireland. And so it'll all happen through partnership. And I've got some people that used to work with me at Inspirato that, sort of helping me launch this, but it's not a full-time gig for any of them. And it's not meant to be a full-time gig for me. It's meant to do, maybe between 4 and 8 trips a year, just to kind of stay close to that experience.
Yeah,
And
stay
you
in
had
the
said a little
mix.
bit earlier about experiences. And one of the things that I've tried to do now is prioritize the experience over the consumption. And so when I have an opportunity to do something, whether it's sort of golf related or anything else, I try and do it. So, for example, as sort of a far out example, I wanted to see the particle accelerator in Europe, in right outside of Geneva, and so there was a trip that was going to require me to end up going to Venice, and I purposely set it up so that I could have this stop in Geneva, and then I had to figure out a way to get the tour for CERN because they just don't let anybody in there. But that was an experience that I wanted to have. So I dedicated some resources to making that happen. And that to me is way more interesting than staying at the Four Seasons that was used in the White Lotus show. Like I don't have any need to consume that. But
Yeah.
what I want to do is be able to take these experiences. What's appealing to me about Passport Golf is because they come from the same club, there's a social cohesion already for the group. And that cohesion gives the group a different flavor than you would get if you just went with your spouse or with your golf buddies.
Hmm.
That creates a unique experience that is generally not replicable because you had the couples going and you had all this other stuff happen in between the golf experiences. You had a unique experience that was shared by a group of people. And that is, I think, much more valuable than staying at, whatever hotel because you can then say I stayed at that hotel.
A hundred
Marrying it
percent.
up with,
Yeah.
yeah, marrying it up with the experience, that's the secret sauce in what we
Yeah.
created with Passport Golf.
And
And
so if someone
so,
wants to go, but what do they do? Go to their golf pro and say, "Hey,
yeah.
how do
So
they get in touch with you?"
So we built a website. It's passportgolf.org. And I did .org on purpose because it's not a commercial, we don't have a retail presence. And it says, do you want more information? It explains what we do. It has sample itineraries, it's got pretty pictures, and it has all the stuff. But then it says, do you want more information? Are you a member of a golf club or are you a golf pro? And if you're a member of a golf club, tell us the name of the golf pro. This will generate an email to them and to us, and we'll be in touch. And
That's super
so
cool.
yeah, so it's all word of mouth. We're not doing any marketing. It's all by word of mouth. And our first trip, I leave on it's in the first week of December. We're going to New Zealand. I'm gonna take the first group out.
Yeah, you'd be the guinea pig. That'll be super cool. I love hearing more about like what success looks for you these days. And I'm sure it's changed over the years with, even more perspective. But my ultimate question for you is what fuels you? Like what gets you out of bed in the morning and keeps you going?
Well, generally, what gets me out of bed in the morning, we have a COVID dog, and so it's usually the dog that gets me out of bed in the morning. That's kind of first thing, but generally, what I try to do is think about. I try and look at the day and say, what's achievable? I'm not great with keeping lists, I've tried like 100 different, organizational systems to try and get, your list down right and that you get everything done. And what I've realized is that people that get really focused on that get so focused on checking everything off the list, they forget to experience whatever it is they were supposed to do on the list. So
Yeah.
instead, what I try and do every night is kind of look at what tomorrow's already scheduled and think about what's the positive stuff that's going to get done by what I've already scheduled, and then what do I want to do in the white space. Do I have a couple hours in the morning, so I'm going to go play golf? Like, do I need to call someone and talk about something, whatever that something is? Do I want to just go on a long walk? Like, I don't know what it is, but I try and figure out what it is and map out so that, when it comes time, when I go to bed, I can look back and say, okay, what I thought I wanted to do was this, and I got it done. And I'm glad I got it done, or it didn't get done because this other crisis erupted, but we got that taken care of. So now I can go back and focus on whatever this was. I always try and think of, what's the achievable goal. So I was playing golf this past weekend, and on a course that I'd only played one time before. And I was playing with someone who's a member. And what they told me was, what you want to do is make sure on your drive that you go to the left of this bunker, but you don't want to go too far left because you need to get here to get over the creek or whatever the thing was. And I said, you know what? I try and set an achievable goal. I want to get it from the white tees over the green tees. Like if it goes that far, like then you check that off and, mentally you've had success. That much detail down the path is not something that I generally try and focus on. I like to have easily digestible goals and know what I'm going to do when I get up in the morning to try and get those things done.
I love it. Well, this is super cool to learn more. Really grateful for it. So thank you.
And if you've got some golf pros, in the Seattle area, have them get in contact
Oh,
with me.
for sure. I don't belong to any
We'll
clubs, but I have lots of friends who do, and I've got 3 clubs that just came to mind for sure.
there you go. We'll get them on a trip.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, you bet. Shauna, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. If you'd like to check out past episodes to hear from more business leaders, go to fueltalent.com/podcast. And if you have a minute, please leave a review and rating on your favorite podcast app, or share this episode with a friend or colleague. Please share any feedback or interview suggestions for other guests by sending a message to podcast@fueltalent.com. I'm Shauna Swerland, and thanks again for listening.